Ever get that feeling like you're drowning in information, desperately wanting to grasp the core ideas, like really understand the fundamentals, but there's just not enough time? Well, if that sounds familiar, then you're in the right place. We're going deep today, really deep, into the world of Paul Grice.
Yeah, a big name in philosophy of language. Still incredibly relevant, way beyond just language, though.
Oh, absolutely. Born in 1913, died in 1988, taught at Oxford, then Berkeley. He didn't actually publish that many books, but his influence, huge. Especially those famous William James lectures, changed how we think about meaning, how we communicate.
Yeah. For those listening, Grice wasn't just about language, though. He was all over the place. Metaphysics, ethics, really insightful interpretations of, like, the big guys, Aristotle, Kant, super sharp mind.
Exactly. So what we're doing today, it's like a deep dive, into the heart of Grice's thinking. What did he contribute? Especially for a philosopher, right? How can his work help us understand communication, meaning, the whole shebang? Our map for this adventure, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Grice, a real goldmine.
Yeah. We're going deep on this one. We'll start with his defense of the analytic-synthetic distinction, a big debate historically. Then on to something super innovative, conversational implicature, like how much we actually understand without words even being said. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course, we can't skip his theory of meaning. Super complex, super interesting.
And we're just getting started. We'll also cover his views on reasoning, his unique take on everyday psychology, super important in his view, plus his broad stance on ontology, his back and forth with ordinary language philosophy, even his ideas on ethics. It all connects, really, a whole web of arguments. All right, let's jump right in. This first one, it's a defense of an idea that, well, was kind of under attack.
First up, Grice and Strawson. They teamed up for In Defense of a Dogma. This paper, it was a direct response to Quine. Yeah, that Quine. And his critique of the analytic-synthetic distinction in two dogmas of empiricism. Grice and Strawson, they felt Quine was saying more than just the distinction is fuzzy or not practical. They thought he was saying it was just wrong, fundamentally flawed, an illusion.
Right. And to make their point, they use some pretty vivid examples. First one, my neighbor's 3-year-old child understands Russell's theory of types. I mean, come on. Any philosopher listening knows that's got to be false. But Grice and Strawson, they were like, hold on, you get what the speaker means. Like, you could, in theory, investigate if it's true or not.
Exactly. The other example, my neighbor's 3-year-old child is an adult. Their argument was, if you really think about it, you'll realize one of two things. One, the speaker is using words like 3-year-old child or adult in some weird way, like they're changing the concepts. Or two, they're just not making any sense, not in the usual way we use language.
So it seems their main point was this. There's a real difference between an utterance that has clear meaning, even if it's false, and one that just doesn't mean anything, or uses words in a totally new way, something Quine, in their view, overlooked.
Right. They really believe there's a difference between changing your belief because of near evidence and a fundamental shift in what words and concepts actually mean. This all comes back to, what does the meaning of an utterance even mean? A question Grice really digs into later on.
Okay, so a strong defense of a key idea. Now, let's move on to something Grice really revolutionized. Conversational implicature. Philosophers, meaning goes beyond the literal. Grice, he gave us the tools to understand how.
Totally. Conversational implicatures. It's like stuff we get not from the words themselves, but from how they're said. Think about the classic. Could you close the door? Literally, it's asking if you can physically do it, but really it's a request.
Right. It's like this subtle dance of interpretation we're always doing. So according to Grice, what's the philosophical engine driving this incredible human ability?
Well, he argued conversation isn't just random chaos, it's cooperative. We assume, without saying it, that the other person is trying to be informative, truthful, relevant, clear. This led him to the cooperative principle. Make your conversational contribution such as is required, and so on. It depends on the purpose of the conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
We're all trying to contribute
Right.
to the conversation's goal. And from this principle, we get the more specific maxims, right?
Exactly. He put them into 4 categories. Quantity, be informative, but not too much. Quality, try to be truthful, have evidence. Relation, be relevant. And manner, be clear, brief, avoid ambiguity, be perspicuous.
Seems like basic rules for good communication. So how do these maxims help explain implicature?
Think about Grice's low on gas example. Person A says, I'm low on gas. Person B says, there's a gas station around the corner on Main Saint. Now, logically, B's statement doesn't guarantee the station is open. But because of the maxim of relation, A can assume B thinks it's open. Otherwise, the info would be useless, irrelevant. So the implicature, the gas station is open. The big takeaway here for philosophers is that meaning relies on context and on these shared assumptions that we're all cooperating.
Ah, got it. We assume everyone's following these unspoken rules, and when what they say seems off, we infer something extra, something that keeps the conversation flowing. You also mentioned something important. These implicatures can be canceled.
Right. That's key. If B had added, but I don't know whether it is open, the implicature that the station is open, it's gone. This canceling, it's how we distinguish implicatures from, like, logical entailments. You can't deny those without contradicting yourself.
This framework is so useful, explains so much about everyday talk. Grice even applied it to conditional statements. Those have always been tricky for philosophers, especially the material conditional.
Yeah, a lot of philosophers have noticed something. Saying a material conditional, true if the antecedent is false or the consequent is true, it often feels wrong. Not logically wrong, but just inappropriate. Grice argued this isn't because the statement's false, it's because it might break those conversational rules. Like, if you know George isn't driving, saying if George is driving, he will be late is just less helpful, maybe even misleading, than just saying George isn't driving.
So the truth conditions might match the logic, but whether it's appropriate to say depends on these cooperative principles. But the Stanford Encyclopedia entry, it points out a problem. This explanation doesn't always work when conditionals are embedded in bigger statements, like beliefs.
Right. Important point. Grice's maxims don't neatly explain why saying Mary believes that if George is driving, he will be late doesn't necessarily mean Mary believes that George will be late.
Yeah?
This shows us Grice's theory is powerful, but language is complex. Logic, language, belief, it all gets intertwined. That's why there's still so much debate.
Yeah, and it's been a lively debate. The entry goes into various critiques, alternative theories like relevance theory. That one says relevance is the one big principle behind implicature. Plus, there's the whole semantics versus pragmatics debate. Grace's work really highlighted that, but it's still a hot topic.
For sure. Philosophers like Bach, Horn, Corda and Perry, Lepore and Stone, Reconati, they're all engaging with Grice's ideas, pushing back, exploring how we get meaning from what's said. How much is from linguistic rules? How much is pragmatic inference? All this just goes to show Grice's work, it's still foundational for anyone thinking about philosophy of language.
Okay, so we've talked about how we infer meaning in conversation. Now let's go deeper into Grice's actual theory of meaning. This is where he tries to connect linguistic understanding to the intentions of the speaker.
Yeah. Grice's main idea was this. To understand what sentences and words mean, we have to understand what the speaker means when they use them. And speaker meaning, that's all about their intentions. He wanted to, reduce linguistic meaning to mental states.
He used this great example, flashing headlights at night. Can you walk us through it for our philosopher listeners?
Sure. Picture this. It's late, you're driving, and someone flashes their headlights at you. Grice says you think something like, why'd they do that? They probably want me to believe my headlights are off. And they want me to know they're trying to tell me that. And importantly, they want that realization to be part of why I now think my headlights are off. So my headlights are probably off.
That's the M intention, right, that layered intention, to make someone believe something, to make them aware of that intention, and to make that awareness a cause of their belief. And Grace's idea was when a speaker says something with this M intention about a specific proposition, that's what they mean.
Right. And for Grice, utterances weren't just spoken words, gestures, sounds, anything communicative that can signal those intentions. These M intentions could be indicative, aiming to create a belief, or imperative, trying to get someone to do something.
And how did he connect this speaker meaning, the M intention, to sentence meaning, the meaning that seems to be in the sentence itself?
His initial idea was this. When we say a sentence has a certain meaning, we're really talking about the standard way people use it. And that involved having specific types of M intentions. So you say, she brandished her clarinet like a tomahawk. The usual use of that sentence means you want your audience to believe it happened, to know you're telling them this, and for that to contribute to their belief.
So he's grounding the abstract meaning of language in the concrete mental states of its users, their intentions to communicate. But the entry mentions a problem. We don't consciously go through all that reasoning every time we understand something. It often feels instant automatic.
Yeah, Grace addressed that in his later work. He adjusted his account of speaker meaning, shifted the focus of the M-intended effect a bit. For indicative utterances, it's not directly intending the hearer to believe something, it's intending them to think that you believe it. Similarly, for imperatives, you want the hearer to intend to do the action.
A subtle but important change. Now, the focus is on the hearer recognizing the speaker's mental state or intended action. And this is where he introduced those mood operators, right? The V dash and the exclamation mark.
Yep. He used V-P for the indicative case, meaning the speaker wants the hearer to think the speaker believes P, and P for the imperative case, meaning the speaker wants the hearer to intend to bring about P. And this intention is based partly on recognizing the speaker's initial intention. These operators, along with this sentence radical, let him formally represent the role of grammatical mood and meaning.
Then he explained sentence meaning, what he called structured utterance type meaning, as having a procedure in one's repertoire, like having a skill or knowing how to operate a machine.
Good analogy. He used the example of a lecturer who always pauses and takes a sedative when he sees an attractive person in the audience. Having that procedure doesn't stop him from having other procedures. The idea is using a sentence with meaning is like following a standard procedure everyone in the language community knows.
So a sentence has meaning because there's a shared procedure for using it, with specific M intentions. But he admitted this initial formulation had limits. It couldn't fully account for the infinite possibilities of language, the structured nature of sentences.
Right. He said these sentence procedures aren't just single things, they're resultant procedures, built from the basic procedures of individual words and syntax, like how a complex machine works because of its parts and how they're arranged.
And to define these resultant procedures, he used the mood operators again, linking sentence structure to the intended mental states or actions. So grammar itself signals the type of procedure being used.
Exactly. But this brings us back to the problem. If meaning is all about these complex intentions and recognizing them, why does communication feel so automatic? We're not consciously doing all this inferential work all the time.
This is where Grice's work on reasoning comes in. He argued reasoning isn't always a step-by-step laid-out process.
Yeah, he talked about enthymematic reasoning. It relies on unstated assumptions, like Jill says, Jack broke his crown, but he is an Englishman, therefore he will be brave. She's not consciously thinking, all Englishmen are brave. She just intends the therefore to make a valid connection.
So for Grice, to reason from A to B, you have to intend that there's a valid argument from A to B, even if you don't spell it all out. And when we do explain our reasoning, we're often reconstructing it, not just revealing hidden premises.
Exactly. He suggested that even with instant comprehension, like hearing Jack brandished his clarinet like a tomahawk and immediately picturing it, we're still implicitly intending there to be a valid inference. We could, if we had to, reconstruct the steps based on the speaker's intended procedure.
But what about the demigod objection? Like, imagine a creature programmed to understand language with purely automatic responses. Just because good reason, bad intentions doesn't mean it actually does, right? If it's all hardwired.
Grice addressed that in Meaning Revisited. He talked about the optimal state of communication. His analysis of speaker meaning describes this ideal state, where communication is totally rational, transparent. Our real conversations don't always reach that ideal, but we often judge them by assuming others have the right intentions, especially when we're justifying our own beliefs and actions.
So even if understanding feels automatic, we can justify it later based on the speaker's assumed intentions. This justification, that's key to seeing meaning as rational.
Right. The fact that we can justify it, even if we didn't consciously think it through at first, shows that meaning and how we respond to it are rooted in our ability to be rational. This connects back to implicatures, too. We make those inferences based on the assumption of cooperative intentions.
It's a complex and fascinating picture of language. Now let's shift gears a bit to Grice's view on everyday psychological explanation. He seemed to think it was really fundamental, maybe even more so than scientific psychology in some ways.
Yeah, Grice saw rationality as this regulating force, shaping our basic pre-rational impulses, our everyday explanations for why people do things, and how we judge rationality itself. It all relies on what he called common sense psychological principles. Just basic, intuitive ideas about how beliefs, desires, and experiences lead to actions and other mental states.
Like, if someone wants something and thinks doing a certain action will get it, they'll probably want to do that action.
Exactly. He also included principles about things like after images, These principles, he argued, they describe and explain behavior, and they also help us evaluate if someone's being rational.
And he gave this everyday psychology a special status,
Yeah,
saying we have good reasons not to abandon it.
very important point. He thought everyday psychology, by describing us as rational, free agents, is kind of self-justifying. We need this framework not just to explain others, but even to make sense of evaluating anything at all. Without it, criticizing, questioning, it all falls apart.
And that leads to his devil of scientism idea, a warning against dismissing everyday psychology as inferior to a purely scientific view of the mind. Seeing ourselves as rational communicators, for Grice, that was fundamental, not just a stepping stone.
Right, and this connects to his ontology, his view on what exists. Grice was super open-minded. He's famous for saying, they work, therefore they exist.
He was willing to accept all sorts of things in our philosophy,
Rare.
as long as they were useful, even if they were unusual or didn't have perfectly clear definitions.
Exactly. He even applied this to the idea of a proposition in his theory of meaning. Quine had criticized propositions, saying they're vague, don't have clear identity conditions, but Grice said as long as they help explain meaning and communication, they have a place in our ontology.
So he prioritized how useful something is for explaining things, especially in everyday psychology, over strict metaphysical rules. Unlike Quine, who wanted a unified scientific worldview.
Exactly. They disagreed on propositions because they disagreed on what matters most. Everyday psychology versus a unified science as the foundation of philosophy.
Now, Grice is often linked to ordinary language philosophy. But what was his actual stance? Was he a straightforward supporter?
It's more complicated. He used ordinary language a lot, for sure, but he also criticized parts of the movement, especially some of the things J.L. Austin did.
Specifically, he didn't like how Austin sometimes concluded things about truth conditions, just because a sentence sounded weird in certain situations. Can
Yeah.
you give an example?
Sure, Austin might say, because it sounds strange to say someone acted voluntarily or involuntarily in a purely habitual action, those actions must be neither. Grice disagreed. He said a sentence can be true but still inappropriate to say for conversational reasons. This brings us back to implicature.
So Grice was careful about the difference between a sentence being false and it being inappropriate. But he saw value in studying ordinary language closely.
Yeah, he thought that by looking closely at what we say, how we say it, and having a theory that can distinguish between different types of failure in an utterance, we can learn about how we think, which is what common sense psychology is all about.
Finally, let's touch on Grice's work on ethics. It's interesting that he applied his reasoning framework to morality.
He did. He didn't create a full ethical system, but he explored moral reasoning, moral reasons, and the link between reasons, actions, and freedom. It's like a two-stage approach, although he didn't explicitly divide it that way. The first stage argues that rationally choosing and pursuing your goals is inherently good for everyone, an unrelativized good.
Unrelativized. That's interesting. Isn't value always relative to someone's perspective?
Grice knew that. He defined unrelativized value, like Aristotle did. What a duly accredited judge, a virtuous person acting freely, would see as valuable. This goes back to his belief in our self-image as rational free agents. A duly accredited judge in that framework would naturally value the rational pursuit of goals.
So our understanding of ourselves as rational leads to this ethical principle. What about the second stage?
In the second stage, which he explored in aspects of reason and the conception of value, he looked at what principles someone who rationally chooses their goals must follow to be consistent with rationality and freedom, and to promote happiness. He examined the demands of rational agency itself. Sadly, he didn't finish this work, but it shows how ambitious his thinking was.
It's amazing how Grice connected all these different areas: language, meaning, conversation, reasoning, psychology, ontology, even ethics. It's a whole system of thought.
Absolutely. For philosophers, Grice's work helps us understand how communication works, how we understand ourselves and the world. His ideas are still relevant, still sparking new thought in all sorts of areas.
So for our philosopher listeners, the question: how could Grice's focus on intention and cooperation in conversation change how we think about current debates in ethics or metaphysics? Could his optimal state idea be a new way to judge philosophical theories themselves? Definitely something to think about.
We really encourage you to read Grice's work and the tons of other stuff written about him. There's a lot to discover in his contribution to philosophy.